This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Ethan Warren, the author of Paul Thomas Anderson, American Apocrypha, a director's cut series publication. If you enjoy the episode, please remember to like and subscribe. Leave a review if you can. You can follow me on Twitter at DrJonty, but before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
Well, I always like to talk about the fact that the first time I saw one of his movies, I really, really hated it. I saw Punch Drunk Love in the theater. I was 16 years old, and it just upset me so profoundly because that's a very sort of aggressive movie in a lot of ways, and particularly when you're 16 and you hadn't broadened my own horizons yet. I just found it such an alienating experience that over time I wanted to keep going back to and keep trying to understand, and that ended up being the way I felt about a lot of his movies. You know, you want to keep going back to the master and trying to understand it and trying to, there's so many surface level pleasures, but there's also so many enigmas and mysteries to it that it's more often than not, his movies draw me back to keep trying to get new things out of them.
Were you expecting like an Adam Sandler comedy when you went to see it the first time?
Yeah, I mean, the reviews said it's an Adam Sandler movie for grown-ups. And when you're 16 years old, that's a very flattering concept. It's, there's something that I'm familiar with, but it's going to make me feel like a grown-up. And I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe something more like Spanglish, but it's not what I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or The Wedding Singer, but with a little bit darker edge. Yeah. I actually thought I remember seeing The Wedding Singer being the first Adam Sandler film I ever saw. I saw it at the cinema, and of course, I was in Britain at the time. When we see people like Adam Sandler or, Chevy Chase or all those, Bill Murray, we just see them. They're just in Ghostbusters. They're not, or they're just in Fletch. That's the first time we've ever seen them. So when I saw Adam Sandler in Wedding Singer, I was like, he's really good. This is a great sort of. I need to rewatch that film because I would never nowadays I'd never go towards an Adam Sandler comedy, but that film really, I thought it was great.
I think that's one of the special ones. Yeah.
Were you already into film at that point? Were you a big sort of filmy nerd, or this is a word that I was thinking of as I was reading your book, film bro, because that seems to be the term of abuse.
I think I was just at that age, kind of starting to. I remember getting my head around the idea that like directors can have a personal stamp and a personal vision. I remember seeing the Royal Tenenbaums, a year or two earlier, and just being like, wow, so like this has a style to it that clearly comes from one human being's mind. And it's so funny to think now, like that was a revelation, that movies were not just sort of assembly line produced. And so just the concept of an auteur, I think, really excited me at that time. And I was definitely drawn to things like The Usual Suspects and Fight Club were really hot back then, which I think are sort of film bro-y movies a little bit. But I was not particularly sophisticated by any means. I just was figuring out that movies were something that could be studied and understood as opposed to just watched.
Did you study film academically?
I only took one course in film theory my whole college experience, at least. And I studied film production. I went and took a 4-week course in how to make movies when I was in college. And then I just had one class called Godard and European Film. That was all that was offered in my school. And so every week you watched one Godard movie and paired it with one movie by somebody else and saw how they were in conversation. So starting with, I don't remember what the first Godard movie was, maybe just Breathless, paired with Rebel Without a Cause, or Weekend paired with, oh boy, that might have been Beware a Holy Horror or something like that, the Fassbinder movie. That was a really, I don't know why Godard was the one that was held up as the one that everything else bounces off of, but that was a lot of fun.
When do you start sort of writing about film then? When do you start becoming someone who's sort of like thinking, I've got opinions, I've got opinions that everyone else deserves to hear?
Yeah. Well, I, my degree, my master's is in creative writing. So I went and got a degree in fiction and thought, well, I'm going to write short stories and novels. And I wrote for my thesis a novel that is just sitting in a drawer that truly nobody should ever ask me to read. And I just felt this sort of desire to do something else with it that was not fiction and not creative nonfiction, not journalism in the traditional sense. And at the same time, I just had this abiding love of film, and I loved reading about film. I remember I was an intern for a documentary production company in Connecticut after grad school, and I would just sit there pretending I was doing my work, but just reading The Dissolve, just plunging through the archives there. And The Dissolve, that was an activator for me. I just loved how they wrote about things and how they came at things. And I ended up in a Facebook group that was all, once The Dissolve shut down, there was a Facebook group that started up that was all former readers of The Dissolve. And they over there started resurrecting some of the old columns. And so we did, they had the Forgot Busters column at The Dissolve. And so we in the Facebook group started doing our own Forgot Busters columns. I wrote about the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie for them, and just for each other, for our own entertainment. We would just post it in the group. And from there, somebody shared Brightwall Dark Room, which was a site that I ended up writing for and as an editor for about 6 years. And what Brightwall Dark Room does that is so, I think, special and unique is the sort of going long and going formally, sort of as formally loose as you feel like going, writing about a movie, but writing about how it impacts you, doing a personal angle or doing at the beginning of Brightwall Dark Room, they were doing poetry and creative nonfiction and things like that. It's now settled more into an essay mold, but there were no rules to how you felt like writing about it. And that really attracted me as somebody who had a degree in creative writing.
I'm so curious about your novel now.
Don't be.
So you're writing for Dark Room Bright Wall, and how does that? And you said you were working for this documentary filmmaker. Are you actually trying to make films at this point yourself as well?
I actually wrote and directed a movie that came out in 2018 that is called West of Her. It came out. It's Went straight to VOD, but is now on Amazon Prime, I think, currently on Paramount Plus. We got distributed through Gravitas Ventures, and that was sort of a lifelong dream that I ended up deciding was not for me. It just was something that I had to do to feel what that was like, and I thought it was going to be in my life, and then eventually realized, no, I just don't have the temperament to direct movies. It's not what I'm built for.
In what way?
So in what way? I mean, you need to be, I think it was Francis Ford Coppola said that directing is just making decisions all day long. When you have a group of, I mean, we had a skeleton crew, so it was a handful of people, but looking to me to make decisions all day long, every single person on that shoot had more experience making movies than I did, which is sort of ideal when you're a director, to surround yourself with competent people who know how to do their jobs and can just do it almost independently. But I didn't have, I went to film school for 4 weeks, and I just didn't have the sort of ability to visualize it in my head and turn that into instruction the way that a director needs to, I think, have a certain degree of snap decisions, knowing what they're doing, and type A personality, for lack of a better term.
I mean, that is, I mean, that skill as well. When people talk about vision, I find it interesting. I kind of wonder what that looks like, if you know what I mean. I was reading about a bunch of, there's a sort of quite a large proportion of people who have something called, I think I'm pronouncing this correctly, aphantasia, I think it is.
Yeah.
And it's the inability to visualize things in your head. If you say, red triangle, everybody thinks of a red triangle, except for like 0.4% of the population or whatever who go, right, how do they get the concept, they don't see a red triangle in their head. And I wonder if there's a version of that in terms of directing films where you're just dealing in ideas rather than like a vision in a more literal sense.
Well, you need to know, how putting this light over here impacts the entire mood of the scene. And that's something that's hard to learn on the go, right, which is what we were doing. I mean, this was a road movie. And so we were driving every day, stopping and filming, and we just didn't have the time. There was no such thing as reshoots because we just needed to be constantly on the move and shooting as we went. And it was a hell of a learning curve. I know that.
So not a great experience, not a happy experience, that one.
Well, it was a dream come true, but it was a real stressful experience. And then, I settled down in the suburbs and had kids. And that's the other thing is, that was not necessarily compatible with going out and making movies. It is for some people, it is for Paul Thomas Anderson, but it's not for me.
Does that experience then, well, it must do. How does that experience alter the way you look at other people's films?
Well, it has made me both more generous to other people and a little more critical, I think. It definitely helped me understand how movies are put together in a way that I would not have been able to come in to my writing life, understanding literally what it takes to make a movie. But it also made me a little more judgmental of movies that aren't put together with a lot of care, because it is such a privilege to get to do that. And it is so difficult and requires so many people's time and effort that, why would it not be the best that it could be?
And yeah, I mean, I was reading Richard Brody's biography of Godard earlier over the weekend, and Godard was someone who was like, constantly giving the most vague directions in terms of like he would tell his cameraman, I don't want to see the legs. And that was his way of saying, okay, do a mid shot, but he wouldn't.
Sure. Yeah.
What I mean? He'd give these really, and he was very, very spontaneous and improvisatory, But yeah, there is I guess the thing I always see is a certain obstinate force of character that is pushed through somehow.
It's something I discovered about myself. I do not have the force of character to keep pushing movies up the hill, because it is. I mean, it's as I said it was a long post production. You're either pushing a rock up a hill or you're pushing it on a flat surface under the best of circumstances.
And so how do you come to this book then, in terms of what's the genesis of the book itself?
Well, I just, after writing essays every month for a number of years, I just sort of got hungry to take on something bigger. And I was pitching another book around. I wanted to write a book about the Brian De Palma movie Phantom of the Paradise. Do you know that one?
Yes, absolutely.
There is a book's worth of material in that movie. And Columbia University Press had a series called Cultographies that was all about cult movies. And so I pitched for that, and they had just shut that series down. And but managed to get my foot in the door with the editor there. There's a lovely man named Ryan Grundyke, and he took a look at some of my other writing and said, well, if you ever want to pitch one of our other series, we have this series called Director's Cuts, which are book length looks at one director, the cinema of X director. I have on my shelf the cinema of Werner Herzog, Todd Haynes, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron. I took a look at the list, and I was sort of shocked that Paul Thomas Anderson wasn't already on there. And so I said, well, hey, I have a lot of interest in this guy. Would you be interested in me writing up a proposal? And they were very interested.
I love the way you just described how you came to Paul Thomas Anderson initially as a sort of like a filmmaker who you had nagging doubts with or problems with, or there was always a discussion that you were having, rather than that you were coming and just going, okay, this guy's blowing me away and I'm up for it all. And that was consistent throughout his filmography.
It depends on the movie. Like something like Boogie Nights, you can really come to that and just enjoy the pleasures of it without needing to interrogate it all that much. But then you move over to Magnolia, the next movie, and that's a movie that you have to wrestle with a little bit. Or Inherent Vice, maybe, one of the movies that requires more wrestling with than just about anything else made this century, at least by a major studio. There Will Be Blood is one that I sort of, it splits the difference. I found it extremely accessible on the first go, but still it has this ambiguous tone. I think that's something that really strikes me with him is the mixture of sort of austerity and jocularity, maybe, for lack of a better word. There Will Be Blood is this grand epic on a biblical scale where a character uses the term brother from another mother. And it's just these bizarre little spasms of humor. Or, in The Master, the little, when Philip Seymour Hoffman gets so frustrated that he all of a sudden shrieks pig fuck. The vomit in Phantom Thread, it's these little spasms of gross out humor or juvenilia that go up against the very seriousness of purpose. I just find that so fascinating.
Yeah, but you point out that something it had never occurred to me, and then when I see it, it's right in front of my face, which is Reynold Woodcock as a name,
right?
Which is just of course that's hilarious as an idea, to have them saying it, and that's the sort of literally dry joke that goes runs through the film. The brother from another mother. I don't recall that line. At what point is that line in There Will Be Blood?
It's when Daniel's half brother, or the con artist who is claiming to be his half brother, arrives. He says, "Are you Daniel Plainview? I'm your brother from another mother," and it's played off as a natural line of dialogue, but you can't help but hear that as the colloquialism that we know it as.
Yeah, Drake and Josh. The way you divide up the films as well is interesting, because you're looking at them in terms of what you call the thesis films and the antithesis films. Could you just explain to the listeners who maybe haven't had an opportunity to read your book yet what you mean by that division?
So yeah, he's made 9 movies so far, and I split them into chunks of 3. So I call the first chunk, which is Hard 8, Sydney, if you want to call it by his preferred title, Boogie Nights and Magnolia, I call the thesis films, which are movies where I feel that he was very assertively declaring, this is what a Paul Thomas Anderson movie is. This is what they feel like. And then the next three, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, and The Master, I refer to as the antithesis films because I feel that those are movies that are really acting in direct opposition to the three that come before. That they are, he has said himself that he got sick of his own voice at various points in his career and needed a sort of a gear shift. And so that is one. And then the last three movies I call the synthesis movies, Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, Licorice Pizza, because they are movies that I think are relatively unconcerned with, I think, as I say in the book, relatively unconcerned with the stakes of their own existence. So he, with those first three movies, came out of the gate saying, these are movies that, well, Hard Eight is a little bit its own thing, but ensemble movies, movies of grand operatic soliloquy, characters saying what they mean all the time, doing cocaine and yelling, ensemble things, I think I said, and things with really clear relationships to their influences, in movies that are more about quoting their influences than kind of absorbing and repurposing them. And then with Punch Drunk Love, there's this very clear dividing line where he, as he has said in interviews, he broke down his whole way of working and then rebuilt it. So suddenly he was now working with much smaller crews. He was telling stories about single protagonists. Those next three movies, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, and The Master, are movies about single protagonists who are extremely repressed, as opposed to stories of ensembles who are extremely expressive. And you don't often see somebody with as clear a dividing line in their filmography as you do between Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love. And it begs to be analyzed. And then the challenge was to try and come up with what the uniting force with what I call the synthesis movies is. And I now see those as movies that are a bit in response to the three that came before, in that if the antithesis movies are movies about repressed characters, the three that come next are movies that are more relaxed in certain ways. You go from the master of this story of the clenched-jawed Joaquin Phoenix character to the next movie is a much more loose and relaxed Joaquin Phoenix character. You go from the brutal Daniel Day-Lewis character to the more genteel Daniel Day-Lewis character, and you go from the anxious, surreal valley, San Fernando Valley of Punch Drunk Love, into the more ecstatic, wide open valley of Licorice Pizza. I think they're movies that are just a little bit less stressed out. And I think that's admirable.
Yeah, there's a sort of maturity there as well of someone who is perhaps doing a little less cocaine and
smoking a little more weed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting that a lot of his films have at their heart a sort of form of drug use, even the Phantom Thread with the mushrooms, and this idea that you will literally intoxicate yourself in order to bring about some sort of life change and some sort of revelation.
Yeah, there's a quote that I wish I had found a way to work into the book where in Punch Drunk Love there are the abstract colors that punctuate certain transitions. The screen will just be overtaken by blues and pinks and swirling blobs of color. And somebody asked him, what were those inspired by? And he answered, marijuana.
In a way, I think I've been a lover of Paul Thomas Anderson's work in a way that's kind of not been particularly critical. I don't know if I've written much about him. I think I reviewed The Master, certainly. I'm not sure if I've written much about him elsewhere, but he's just definitely someone who I've just sort of like taken in and enjoyed. And I found it was really interesting reading your book. It made me really think about some of the stuff a lot more deeply and a lot more in terms of politics. So, for instance, you're very good on bringing out the problems in terms of his relationship to race, for instance, which is something I have to confess. Aside from that Licorice Pizza sort of Japanese joke, let's call it generously, I hadn't really much thought about.
Yeah, well, it's something that really came up most significantly with Magnolia, where people pointed out that he pitched that really as this definitive vision of the San Fernando Valley. And he did not say this is my experience of the Valley. He said this is what the Valley is like if you were to go there. And there are very few significant characters who are not white, and the ones that are not white are there to serve the white characters or to be as more than one person has pointed out. You have the game show where it's 3 white kids intellectually beating up on 3 non-white, I think they are all non-white competitors, and he got pushed back on that, and he really did not have an ability to say, well, it's my experience, I am showing my environs. He just kept pushing back and saying, no, this is what it's like in the Valley. And you can't really say that of the San Fernando Valley. And so the way I see it is, since then he has really retreated to these period stories where there is less onus on him to do a realistic, quote unquote, ethnographic survey of, There Will Be Blood, this story set in the early 20th century oil fields. You're not going to get too much pushback from the casual viewer on the demographic makeup of your ensemble. Or if you even do Inherent Vice, that is so much a farce that you have the plausible deniability of, sure, the only black character is a Black Panther and the only Asian character is a prostitute. Well, it's all just jokes. And then Licorice Pizza, the Magnolia thing came back around again, where it's, why are there so few non-white people even making up the frame, let alone having lines of dialogue. It is going to be interesting to see how he keeps pushing forward, because there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to kind of let him skate by on that. And now his next movie might be there's the rumor that Denzel Washington will lead his next thing, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Right, absolutely. I remember Phantom Thread, when that first came out. I watched it in London, and quite a few friends of mine were saying, how does Alma not? How is nobody noticing that Alma's got this strong European accent, this strong non-British European accent, and this is happening just after the war, and people would be saying, where are you from? What are you doing? And it seems to be like, okay, I don't know. There's a certain, it's almost like a stylistic choice that I'm not going to sully my vision with this sort of consideration, obviously sully my vision means you're making that decision. I'm projecting something onto PTA that you might not actually be feeling, but that's sort of how it comes.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Across to me.
Yeah, well, I think he likes to tell stories that are sort of mythic and broad strokes rather than worrying about the specifics. That's a really salient one. Vicky Krieps had to bring a lot of personal subtext to Alma's relationship to World War II, and she has spoken in interviews about this whole subtext, whereas Anderson didn't even decide what country she was from. He just said she was from over there. I think that was right. What he said in his interview for the Academy Conversation series. So what matters is that she is not from London. That's a very mythic concept. It's a fairy tale, rather than the ethnographic and global geopolitical realities that I don't know, I think sully his vision is a perfectly appropriate way to say it.
I mean, I was thinking about that also in terms of sex, because there's a great chapter where you talk about the screenwriting and how you compare the drafts of the screenplay to what finally makes it into the finished film, either stuff that wasn't filmed or scenes that were filmed and then cut out. And there's one of Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood where he sort of commits. You quite rightly point out that it's ambiguous if he commits cunnilingus or commits a sexual act or not in an alleyway, and I can kind of again see why that would take away from his sort of more mythic, enigmatic character if you just think, oh, he just can't get it up. That's his problem.
Right? Yeah, and so it's Daniel Plainview's impotence is implied in the finished movie rather than explicit as it is in the screenplay, and so it's all displaced onto the as plenty of people have pointed out, the almost sort of sexual connotations of the oil extraction process itself stands in for his inability to get it up.
I think there must be, because thinking about his career as I was reading your book as well, you can't help but think about postmodernism as a sort of post-war, late 20th century impulse, I guess. It feels like to me like he is a very transitional filmmaker, that he starts off in a very postmodern, similar to Tarantino to some extent as well, where everything is quoted. You can see the Altman, you can see the various, and you have a great chapter where you talk about his debt to Jonathan Demme, to Robert Downey Sr., to Kubrick. And yet, as he goes on, it feels like that postmodernism and that verve is settling into something which is more akin to sort of romantic irony, to something which is at once still not taking itself totally seriously, but allows for the possibility of being taken seriously much more. Does that make any sense?
It does. People have described his first three movies as like movies about movies. And that from there, I think romantic irony is a very appropriate way of putting it. Romantic, capital R, romanticism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's the movies are still self-aware. They are still movies that he never wants you to completely sink into the experience of watching his movie. There's always formally stuff that pulls you out a little bit in what I think is a productive way. I describe it in the book as provocative versus evocative alienation effects. So in those early movies, there's these formal choices that are very alienating, and I think they push you out of the movie a little bit in a way that I think is comparable to Tarantino, whose movies are also movies about other movies in a way that is very appealing to a lot of people and often appealing to me. And later, the movies, the alienation effects in something like Inherent Vice, it's less reminding you of other movies and more just sort of shaking up your ability to perceive this movie in a way that draws you closer to the stoned perspective of the central character.
I think one thing Inherent Vice sort of lacked for me on the first viewing, I watched it. I mean, I'm a huge Thomas Pynchon fan. I love the book. I love Gravity's Rainbow and V, and I've read everything except Mason Dixon for some reason. I'm not sure why. I've got it downstairs, but and for some reason, what I feel in retrospect, I didn't feel this at the time that I was watching it, and I've since rewatched it and enjoyed it much more. But in retrospect, it doesn't have those standout cinematic moments, like, for instance, the drilling for oil in There Will Be Blood, or in Licorice Pizza, the whole scene with the moving truck, which is just awesomely cinematic. It's just such a wonderful thing that couldn't be a stage play, wouldn't work in a novel, but on screen, it's just pure cinema. And I think Inherent Vice sort of kind of lacks that in a way. But the way what you talked about in the book, where you describe it as being influenced by Police Squad, that makes me really want to watch it again. Makes me want to go back and check that out. Because of course, it's in the trailer. There's a pratfall that is excellent,
Yeah, it's he was very inspired by those Zucker Abrams Zucker comedies, and it's more, I think, about just the density of visual information that he sticks into the movie. There's some pratfalls and there's some slapstick, but it's more just how he packs the frame, which is his attempt to get at the Pynchon-esque density of language games, that you can't evoke Pynchon's writing by doing anything except, I think he says, it just needs to be packed with stuff and a lot of fun.
And of course, he uses a voiceover in that, which feels very, I mean, that always feels like a filmmaker sort of maybe losing their nerve a little bit when it comes to literary adaptation. I mean, voiceovers have been done excellently by movies. But when it comes to literary adaptation, there's always a sense of like, okay, you know the words, here they are, you know? Yeah,
well, it's just I think he must have just thought it would be a shame to make a Pynchon movie and lose the prose. And what's really interesting about that is it's such a nostalgic story. It's such an elegiac story, and it's written in the voice of Thomas Pynchon, who is writing about his own environs. That's, Gordita Beach is Manhattan Beach at the time that he was living there. And he takes that language and he puts it in the mouth of not an older man, but a young woman, which is, a really interesting, exciting choice, I think.
I always think of Pynchon as someone who's great at sentences. I think that's one of the, it's that, I don't know if it's Nabokov's effect on American literature, but, you guys write brilliant sentences.
Well, there's the idea of the sentence writer versus the paragraph writer, and he's definitely a sentence writer.
When you finished working on the book, what was the film that you sort of most had sort of come to reassess in the process of viewing multiple times and thinking of the book, of the films together?
I think probably the bookend ones, Hard Eight and Phantom Thread, because I wrote this entire book without Licorice Pizza existing, and then had to, at the last minute, rewrite the entire book to absorb Licorice Pizza into it, because it came out just as I was finishing my first draft.
God damn you, Anderson.
I know. And sidebar, it's happening again. I'm writing a book on Bob Dylan now.
Right.
And James Mangold has just gone in, or is heading into pre-production on his Bob Dylan book. It's gonna happen again. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
With Timothée Chalamet.
With Timothy, he's going to be doing his own singing. That's going to be interesting. We can't get into that. So Hard Eight was a movie that I just didn't have the interest in sort of diving below the surface of, because it's the one that I think just about everybody is least interested in. It's the least Paul Thomas Anderson-y of his movies. And it's also a fairly enigmatic movie. And so it's one that it took a while to kind of open itself up and show me what it was doing. And then I came to have a real fondness for it. And then Phantom Thread, I came to appreciate most by reading the screenplay. The screenplays for all of his movies except Licorice Pizza are pretty readily available, either in PDF or for Phantom Thread and The Master, I had to find on eBay the for your consideration published paperback versions that they sent around. And with Phantom Thread, you realize just how much at this point he is writing in and then cutting out. That is a movie that has so much that is explicit in the screenplay, and he took out and left to implication. So, on the page, Alma is talking and talking and talking about what she feels and why she feels that way. And she's talking about her jealousy of her cool sister and how all she's ever wanted to do is be a wife and a mother. And that gets taken out, but it's still there. Or Reynolds Woodcock talking about his military service. He is very explicitly a combat veteran in the screenplay. And then you take that out, but still there's sort of the whiff of it as an implication. I found that really fascinating. So that was very rewarding.
You can sort of imagine him as someone recovering from PTSD, and
exactly
the whole of the house is based on his routine, his diet, everything is based on, I don't want any more chaos in my life,
Totally.
Literally conflict averse.
That doesn't have time for confrontation.
It would not over breakfast. God, I love that film. One of the influences that, because you mentioned it in terms of Hitchcock and in terms of Rebecca, which I think was quite a few people coming out with at the time. It also reminds me a lot of James Ivory. who I sort of think is kind of underrated as a director. I think he sort of gets a little bit too much dismissed as a prestige sort of, I don't know, Bridgerton, proto-Bridgerton sort of proto-Downton Abbey sort of thing. And he's really not that, his Maurice is amazing, that film. And, it came out in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and it was a film about a gay guy who, which didn't have an unhappy ending. It was kind of quite revolutionary in its own way. Sorry, digression. But I think
it's totally relevant. Yeah,
I think Phantom Thread has that. It has that ivory feel to it, also of sort of emotional constipation or repression coming out in really interesting other ways.
Well, quite literally, the repression comes out in interesting ways in newspaper-lined bathrooms, as you see them at the end.
Again, a point that you made that I thought, is that? I mean, I remember them being in the bathroom. I don't remember the newspaper, and then the implications of that are quite gross.
Yep, and very funny.
In terms of the future, in terms of looking towards where Paul Thomas Anderson is going, I mean, he has been linked to people like Tarantino. I remember when I saw, Boogie Nights, I was thinking of certain scenes very much from a Tarantino point of view. Also sort of thinking of it as a sort of riffing on Pulp Fiction to some degree as well. He's also sort of had this contentious sort of relationship with the press in terms of, the infamous sort of David Fincher comment that he made at the wake of Fight Club. It's interesting that, again,
for the listener, he said, I wish David Fincher testicular cancer for all of his jokes about it. I wish him testicular fucking cancer.
Right, absolutely. And you make the point that his father had recently passed from cancer, so it was
right. Yeah.
It wasn't as gratuitous as it might seem, although at the same time it kind of crossed a line.
It's pretty rough, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm thinking of this. The reason I was sort of bringing up Quentin Tarantino again is we've got this idea that he's going to sunset his career, that he's like, the last film I'm going to do is the next one. I don't think Paul Thomas Anderson is going to do that. I certainly hope he isn't. I can see him kind of changing even more. How do you view it? How do you sort of look forward to that?
I think it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, since I do have this urge to block his career into these phases, ostensibly that would mean that he's moving into a new phase in my personal conception of it. And so it'll be really interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, Licorice Pizza is a family man movie. He made that movie, like so many of the incidental characters who are bustling around the edges of that are family friends or his kids' friends. And so what I think is going to be interesting is to see if he sort of keeps tightening his circle. Famously, he hasn't had a director of photography on his last couple of movies, the camera crew, and he just worked collectively as a pseudo DP. And so to see if he keeps getting smaller and smaller and working with the people that are already around him that he knows and loves, or if he is going to broaden again. I'm really curious about that. I'm curious if he'll ever make a movie set in the present again. He hasn't made a movie set in the present day since Punch Drunk Love, which by now is set 21 years ago. And he seems to have absolutely no interest in telling stories set in the present. He's been pretty explicit about that. He said in interviews around Licorice Pizza that the modern world is a cannonball that is dragging us all down. I'd love to see him wrestle with that. I wish he would. There's so much there that seems to align with so many of his interests. But he just would rather look backwards. And God bless him. I mean, who is making period pieces quite like this? But I'm curious what he would do.
That's such an interesting, okay, this could be another digression. Contemporary American filmmakers, kind of, how many of them are making films about the present? I'm thinking, Tarantino's gone backwards. The Coen brothers.
Wes Anderson has not made a movie yet set in the present since around. It's since the Darjeeling Limited for Anderson, Wes Anderson, yeah.
Yeah.
Since Death Proof for Tarantino.
I mean, I guess there's an element that you just don't know the present as well, in the sense that Tarantino's present was was before he was famous, and that was in
Right.
the very early 90s. So anything after that, how can he even look at the present without just seeing it through hotel rooms and
That's an interesting point. Yeah. I think there's also people don't want to make movies with smartphones in them, which, for better or worse, it seems a little bit silly. I think you could do plenty of interesting things with smartphones. Steven Soderbergh doing plenty of interesting things with the present world. But Anderson has said,
that's a very good counterexample. Yeah.
Look at Kimmy is a movie that is all about very present day technological concerns and is extremely entertaining. But Anderson has said that smartphones and YouTube is just stuff that is so anathema to him. He's just disgusted by it.
Yeah. This goes back to the sort of postmodernism into romanticism sort of thing. It's like Tarantino as well in terms of his, I'm not going to use a computer. I'm going to do everything with a pen and yellow legal pad and everything. It's walking backwards into the future. You're not
Right.
You don't want to. There's loads of young filmmakers who are doing it. I don't think it's necessary. It's like you don't necessarily want to see your dad dancing at a disco. So stop breakdancing, Dad. It wasn't even good when it was good. Yeah, God, that's a real. This is what's so interesting about the book as well. And one other thing I wanted to bring up as well was in terms of the sort of gender politics that go through this. And you make the point that there are lots of pairings throughout the films, which the characters who reflect each other or they are in conflict. Maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I call them gendered dyads, which are rather than pairing. I think he's got plenty of romantic pairings, but he's more interested in the pairings of characters who are of the same gender identity and who reflect two sides of a whole. So looking at, it's most obvious in There Will Be Blood or The Master, these stories of two characters going up against each other. But you see it as well in Punch Drunk Love. That's a romance, but the more, I think, ideologically interesting pairing is Barry and Dean, Mattress Man, the sort of meek character versus the more aggressive and bloviating one. And Doc Sportello and Bigfoot Bjornson. What often comes of these pairings, though, is not that we see that one of them is superior to the other, that one mode of gender expression is superior, but that you need to come to some kind of, again, synthesis, where Barry has to absorb elements of Dean rather than show that Barry is superior to Dean. Or you see at the end of Inherent Vice, you see Doc and Bigfoot quite literally sort of intersect as they start speaking in unison. You see that they have to learn from each other and absorb elements of each other to more effectively express their gender expression. I think that's Cyril and Alma are the more interesting pairing to me in Phantom Thread than Reynolds and Alma, because they represent some ideological distinction.
Yeah, Reynolds is almost irrelevant in a way.
Yeah.
They seem to be more active characters.
Yeah, and represent these two very distinct modes of femininity, where Cyril is basically a military general and Alma is the nurturing wife and mother, eventual mother.
It just feels, I feel that there is such a wealth of things to think about with Paul Thomas Anderson in terms of, every level of his creativity. And the point that you made earlier that he's sort of dealing in these myths as well seems to me to add depth and richness to his movies. Sort of at the very beginning of this conversation, sort of made an offhand reference to sort of Film Bros, which has become an internet way of sort of kind of dismissing. I mean, this podcast right now would be seen as the sort of maybe the nadir or the apotheosis of film bro discourse, probably the nadir. How do you feel about that? There's a sort of gleeful, I remember Fiona Apple recently came out with sort of something about sitting and listening to Quentin Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson talking all night about movies and just being like, oh, fuck these guys. And this was sort of received with such a roar of approval. There was a little bit of me that was just like, yeah, but also I kind of wouldn't mind listening to them, and see what they have to say.
Well, I think part of that was that they were so coked out of their minds that what they were saying maybe was not as interesting as it could have been. I think the term film bro, it's a little bit reductive, but also it represents people who use film as a replacement for their own intellectual character. And if I see more movies than anybody else, and if I see more esoteric movies than anybody else, then I am by default the most interesting person in the room. And I think the idea of a film bro is an overtalker, somebody who is not interested in the perspective of other people. And so the onus is on you to, not you, the onus is on the theoretical you to see as much as possible, absorb as much as possible, but still be open conversationally to hearing the other perspectives and not just taking your own knowledge as superior because you've seen the most esoteric movies. And me at certain times in my life, me around circa Godard and European Film Course, absolutely thought that I was the most interesting person in the room because I had seen Fassbinder movies.
Okay, brilliant. Ethan, listen, I've got one more question for you, which is I like to ask for a film book recommendation.
Well, the writer that I am really continually fascinated by has written a book on Paul Thomas Anderson, and he is a guy named George Towles, who is based out of Canada. And he wrote a book. It's just called Paul Thomas Anderson, technically. And I think he is a writer of essentially ecstatic poetry about film. He's got a book of essays that I have on the nightstand called, I think it's A House Made of Light, Essays on Film. He is a collaborator with Guy Maddin. He wrote a lot of Guy Maddin's movies or co-wrote them. And I just find the way that he looks at film to be, I don't always agree with a lot of what he says, but the way he pulls in poetry and philosophy and all of that is consistently fascinating to me. And then another writer who has written a book on Paul Thomas Anderson, Adam Naiman, I think is a fascinating writer. Have you had him on the show?
Yeah, he was on, I think we might have talked about Paul Thomas, but we did talk about Showgirls and we talked about Fincher and we talked about a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't want to, well, I will select one other book of his, which is a deep cut. His book on Ben Wheatley is fascinating to me, a filmmaker I really love and that Adam has really thought very deeply on. I think that book may only be current up to the point of was it Free Fire, the Ben Wheatley movie?
Yeah.
And he's made plenty since then, but Adam has written about him online. You can't go wrong reading an Adam Naiman book or a George Towles book.
Brilliant. Those are two great recommendations. And Ethan, you're working on the Bob Dylan book. Will that be Bob Dylan in cinema? That be a sort of crossover?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's Bob Dylan as a cinematic figure. So Dylan has been the subject of documentaries. He has been the subject of one very unusual biopic, and now will seemingly be the subject of a probably much more conventional biopic. He has directed movies, co-written movies, starred in movies. He has really, going back to the 60s, been all over the map in terms of film. And you can trace his biography through the movies that he was doing and kind of trace the industrial history of film through his participation in it. So a lot to talk about there. And I'm just getting started. So it'll be a couple of years before you're reading that one.
Excellent. You'll have to come on the show and talk about it once it's ready.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Sam Peckinpah, I remember throwing knives at Bob Dylan during the filming of...
I don't know if I've heard that one. I know that he stood up during the dailies and urinated on the screening room screen. I know Bob Dylan witnessed that. Quite a time to be around Sam Peckinpah.
I think he must have done that with every film, because I'm sure I've heard that story about The Getaway as well. So I think he's just he just didn't know the way to the toilet. So,
yeah, it's just his habit.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ethan. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
I'm Nellie Sudri, the #1 dating coach and matchmaker for high-value singles. I've been featured in Forbes and Cosmopolitan, and you may have seen me work my magic on the hit TV show Match Me in Miami. I've even partnered with dating apps that you probably have on your phone right now. So if you're fed up and frustrated with modern dating, first of all, I don't blame you. And second, you have come to the right place. So I'm here to help you meet the person of your dreams so you can ultimately get out of the dating game altogether. I'm so excited to finally announce my new podcast, High Value Dating, which you can now stream anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm excited for you to find love, and I hope you are too. So if so, make sure to tune in to High Value Dating.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.